Well, here we go. Welcome to Rugby Borough Council's Planning Committee. This Wednesday, the 8th of November, I'm Councillor Tony Gillis, the chair of this committee. The meeting is being web streamed to the public through the Council's YouTube channel. During the meeting, when asked to speak, please use the push to talk button on the microphone in front of you. This will allow the camera to pan in your general direction and everyone to hear you. Before we begin the formal agenda, I'm obliged to read out the following fire notice. There is no fire drill scheduled in the building this evening. If the fire alarm sounds, then please could I ask that you make your way out of the building, down the main staircase and out of the main doors of the Town Hall and congregate at the entrance to Caldegut Park. An officer of the Council will give instructions on when it is safe to return to the building. Moving on to the agenda, the first item is to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of October. All those in favour, please show. In that case, I'll sign the minutes. The next item is apologies for absence.
No apologies, Chair.
Excellent, 100% record so far. Next item, declaration of interest. To receive declaration of interest as defined by the Council's Code of Conduct for councillors. First of all, non-pecuniary. Councillor Becky Mowdis.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a ward councillor for application R211234.
Thank you. Any more non-pecuniary? Councillor Sanderson.
Yes, Chair. On the report on actions for appeals. One of the actions for appeals is in my ward.
Thank you. Anything under notice under Section 106 Local Government Finance Act 1992, non-payment of community charge or council tax? We're all okay on that. Before I continue on to item 4, welcome Councillor Mystery, our speaker. If you just make sure your phone's on silent, please. Thank you. Well done. I'm just going to read out the rules. The order in which each item will be dealt with. The planning officer will speak first and present the application. The committee will be asked if they have any points of clarification from the officer. The representatives for the objectors, the applicants and then the ward council will each be invited to speak. The planning officer can address any material issues arising from the speaker's comments and accept questions from councillors. Any ward councillor or councillor who speaks on an application as part of the public speaking process shall leave the meeting once all speakers have completed their presentations relating to it. The committee will then go into debate on the application, asking relevant questions of the planning officer if necessary. A formal recommendation will be made and voted on. Rules for the speakers. Speakers will have 3 minutes to make their representation. They'll be warned by a short alarm when they have 30 seconds left, and then further alarm will sound when their time has expired. Their presentation should then be brought to a halt. No extra time will be allowed. All speakers should direct their presentations to amplifying the planning matters they have previously put to us from the benefit of the council, of the committee. Speakers should restrict their comments to material planning considerations only. Any non-planning issues will be disregarded. Speakers should not introduce any additional information that has not been previously brought to the planning authority's attention, i.e. introduce late items that have not been suitably considered by officers and properly addressed in the officer's report to the committee for councillors' deliberation. No visual aids or handouts may be used and no questions to officers or councillors will be allowed. No members of the public are allowed to take part in the debate once their presentation has been given. Okay, we'll move on now to the first item and Sam's to present.
Councillors, this application is R21-1234 at land adjacent to Treetops, Shilton Lane. and this application is a retrospective application for the change of use of a land from a paddock to provide 2 residential gypsy pitches, including 2 amenity blocks with associated parking, access and entrance gates. So the application site is located within the green belt, located on the southern side of Shilton Lane, and it infills a gap between existing G&T site and the residential dwelling of treetops. As the site imagery shows, through the course of this application, the applicants have moved from the residential dwelling of treetops and moved on to the adjacent site. So the site prior to the applicants moving onto the site and the existing plans can be seen above. As you can see, the caravans were kept to the rear of the residential dwelling of treetops, and the previous owners have now left the residential dwelling and take up residence on the adjoining parcel of land. So here are the proposed plans and an aerial site image of the caravan now situated on the site. The proposed planning permission would see the site split into 2 pitches. Each pitch would be made up of 1 static mobile home and 1 touring caravan, with 2 parking spaces provided for each pitch, with 1 space being set up for electric vehicle charging. The site proposal would be bordered by a 2-metre high closed boarded fence along its front boundary, with steel gates set back from the main road frontage for access into the site. So the above plans show the amenity blocks just under 4 metres in height and a footprint measuring 6 metres by 3.15 metres. And here are the proposed elevations for the static caravan. So in terms of technical consultation, no technical consultees raise any objection, subject to a number of conditions. Shilton and Barnacle Parish Council have objected to the proposal in relation to inappropriate development in the Greenbelt, over-concentration of development with no local need identified, highway safety concerns and no sustainable transport links. No third-party public objections were received. So in terms of the key considerations and the principle of the development, the application site is within the Greenbelt. Local plan policy GP2 states only where national policy applies will development be permitted within the Greenbelt. So in terms of the national policy, paragraph 147 of the MPPF states that inappropriate development is by definition harmful to the Greenbelt and should not be approved except in very special circumstances. Paragraph 149 of the MPPF also sets out a range of exceptions to inappropriate development. However, the proposal does not meet any of the exceptions. Therefore, in summary, the proposal is deemed as inappropriate development and therefore it should not be approved except in very special circumstances. So moving on to the impact on the openness of the Greenbelt. The development is such that it would result in encroachment into the countryside and the Greenbelt. However, the built form does infill a piece of land within an existing area of development, which somewhat alleviates the impact due to the envelope of built form around the parcel of land. The LPA considered that if the site were to be reinstated to open countryside due to the built form, potentially would be unlikely to be experienced physically or visually as the open countryside due to the envelope of built development around it. However, as the proposal replaces open countryside and greenbelt land into built form, the LPA does accept that by nature of development there is encroachment into the countryside, and this harm must be weighed against the very special circumstances in the planning balance. A written ministerial statement dated the 31st of August 2015 establishes that intentional unauthorised development is a material consideration to be weighed in the determination of planning applications and appeals. The ministerial statement also confirms that, subject to the best interest of the child, personal circumstances and unmet need are unlikely to clearly outweigh the harm to the Greenbelt. In direct relation to this material consideration, the LPA has been advised that there are 3 children on the site. This, therefore, will be weighed within the planning balance and form the basis for the case for very special circumstances. So, Policy DS2 of the local plan outlines the assessment for the suitability of sites for the allocation for residential and mixed-use occupation by gypsies, travellers and travelling show people. As stated in section 12 of the officer report, the proposal site would be considered acceptable and in accordance with policy DS2 in relation to access to services, flood risk, scale, visual and acoustic privacy, vehicular access, design, landscaping, smell, noise or vibration, And the applicant has also been forthcoming stating that there is an adequate supply of mains water supply, mains power, drainage, sewage and waste disposal facilities. These matters do require conditions to safeguard them and make sure they are implemented. The members should now have received the addendum correction list, which identifies a discrepancy within the officer report, which unfortunately used an outdated evidence base. So in terms of the need, the Gypsy and Traveller Accommodation Assessment was updated as of 2022, and this shows that there is a significant need for Gypsy and Traveller pitches, with 79 pitches requiring to be delivered between the period of 2022 to 2037. For clarity, this need is greater than that originally identified within the officer report. Further from this, the latest local development scheme sets out a programme for delivery of the Gypsy and Traveller DPD. In line with that programme, an issues and options consultation and call for sites was undertaken in autumn 2022. No site submissions were received in response. The LPA therefore does not currently have sufficient allocated sites to meet the requirements for Gypsy and Traveller provision within the borough. In consideration, if the application were to be refused and the applicant evicted due to the lack of formal provision within the borough, it is likely that they would have to resort to an unauthorised encampment elsewhere in the borough, which would then face the same considerations as this proposal in front of us. This option would also effectively result in a person of specific medical needs being made homeless, as well as potentially having serious repercussions for health and well-being of these individuals and those who care for them. It could also jeopardise the children's access to education provision and the family's access to necessary ongoing medical treatments and support services. So moving on to the planning balance and the case of very special circumstances. The proposed scheme is considered inappropriate development within the Green Belt and as such is not acceptable unless there are very special circumstances. The LPA do identify that the harm to the openness of the Green Belt. However, determine this to be less than significant due to the infilling nature of this proposal within existing built form. The LPA currently have a shortfall in Gypsy and Traveller site provision within the borough, and there are no allocated locations within the borough that the applicant and their family could lawfully move to. Therefore, again, if the application were to be refused, the likelihood is the creation of a further unauthorised site within the borough. This need is determined as significant and carries significant weight in favour of the very special circumstances. The applicant also has been forthcoming with unique personal medical needs for 2 occupants on the site, and the LPA accept that these personal requirements do contribute to the applicant's very special circumstances. The ministerial statement of 2015 does state that personal circumstance and unmet need are unlikely to clearly outweigh the harm to the Greenbelt, subject to the best interest of the child. The LPA has been informed that there are 3 children residing on the site. So cumulatively, the need, the personal circumstances, and in the interests of the child, the LPA do deem this to carry significant weight in favour of very special circumstances when balanced against the ministerial statement. Therefore, again, through a combination of significant need, no other allocated sites, personal medical circumstances of the occupiers, and in the best interest of the children on site, this proposal is deemed to establish very special circumstances which outweigh the inappropriate development. Further from this, due to the personal circumstances contributing to establishing the very special circumstance for the development, the development is required to only be applicable to the current applicant needs on site, and therefore this application should be conditioned to be a personal one. Therefore, it is considered that on balance the application should be approved subject to the conditions. Thank you.
Have we got any points of clarification for the officer? Councillor Becky Mountis.
Hi, thank you. Really good report. Thank you, Sam. One of the conditions is that the application will be just for that person named on there. How will that be monitored? Because I know that a lot of the time we wouldn't be aware of who owned the site or has moved in or moved out. So I'm just wondering how that can be sort of known.
Effectively, that as soon as that person was no longer on the site, that then becomes a breach of planning condition. Now, in terms of monitoring, there wouldn't be consistent monitoring throughout this site specifically, or any of the planning permissions that we approve. It would require either an informant who are aware of the site, or the applicants to be forthcoming with any changes to the site. And that would be in the form of, a future amended reapplication for the site, or a change, a variation of the applicants on the site. But in terms of monitoring, it wouldn't be the site would not be consistently monitored. No.
Councillor Mrs. Garcia.
Thank you. I was just wondering, Sam. Obviously, you've had information about the conditions of 2 of the people. Are the children in full-time education?
That's not been evidenced to the council, no. The age of the children has been evidenced, and we were made aware that it was 3 children under the age of 5.
Under the age of 5?
Yes.
So they wouldn't be. And is there anything there to ensure that they do go into full-time education, should this be granted?
No, and I think that would exist outside of the remit of what a planning application could condition.
But that is part of the planning application, though, isn't it? That they need the education.
So the ministerial statement just goes into the best interests of the child. It doesn't specifically refer to the need for the child to be in any sort of parameters. It's the assessment that there is children on site, and that forms a significant basis to form in very special circumstances.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just through you, Chair, just to clarify that point. Obviously, the attendance of children at school isn't for us as a planning authority to monitor. That will be covered by separate legislation.
It says somewhere where I've been reading that something about schools being nearby, as if they were attending local schools.
I can clarify that point. So in terms of when we assess, when we have to assess suitabilities of sites in line with policy DS2, one of the criteria is access to essential services. I don't know the wording off the top of my head, but it does refer to medical and schools. So effectively that paragraph that you've read in the officer's report is an indication that if these services are required in terms of this site being used for this purpose, they could get any occupier of that site could gain access to a school within a relatively short distance. Although that section does identify that distance would need to be travelled to by car.
Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I was pleased to see on the report that there were some conditions regarding habitat and actually possibly improving what had been destroyed before. But what worried me most was not that there were conditions, because a wise old planner once told me the best way to control something is with conditions. It's, are those conditions enforceable, and are we going to give enforcement powers to our officers should those conditions be breached?
Yeah, well, obviously, as part of our department, we do have an enforcement arm of our department that would deal with any breaches of conditions. Again, the applicant can be made aware in the public forum and can be made aware by the council that, if this were to go ahead, the planning application is only approved subject to those conditions. So a breach effectively means that planning application, it's not being approved. So, yeah, I don't mind saying publicly, that it is really important that if this were to go ahead, that these conditions were abided to. In terms of their enforceable nature, these have been gone over with our enforcement officer, because obviously now we're in the retrospective stage of this application, and I won't know the numbers off the top of my head, but a number of them have been applied to be completed within a certain period of time. I think the highways one, the contaminated land ones, some of the more, ones that really need to be done immediately, they have been sort of tightened up so that there is an enforceable arm a specific time period where the council can look in and go, okay, this hasn't been complied to within this time period. So there has been a conscious effort from the department to make sure that the conditions in place are enforceable.
Thank you. That's really useful.
Okay, any more points of clarification, or should we move into the debate? Okay, and it's bearing in mind that it is an intentional authorised development, development in the green belt, and it seems to be, to me, hinges on, are there very special circumstances, and do they exist? Councillor Toby Lawrence.
Yeah, so absolutely. The question here is the material harm against the very special circumstance. We have had a debate within the last 12 months very similar to this, under similar conditions, where no one in this particular area wants to be the concentration of gypsy encampments, which has occurred in this area. The consideration at the time, therefore, was that whilst we can understand the very special circumstances, which gives us an ethical need to provide an environment for these children, for the people who are needing medical, we're not in a position or inclined to offer full planning permission. This is because the local plan is out there being discussed at the moment, and he will be looking at the whole strategy around Gypsy's encampment. My recommendation to us all is therefore we offer temporary plan permission for the same period as previously discussed, which I believe was 5 years, which will allow the local planning process to finish, and then we can understand where the full potential for gypsy encampment will be across the whole of the borough and not purely in this particular area. So that's my suggestion to it, and that's what I would propose, is that we offer a 5-year temporary planning permission.
Okay, we've got Councillor Mrs Meldis.
Thank you, Chair. So I alerted the planning department in 2021 that the paddock area, the green area, had been laid over with hard standing, and I was assured at the time that the purpose of a paddock is to remain undeveloped. So if it's being altered in any way, this would result in an enforcement stop notice being served. And due to its siting within the green belt, this further escalates the issue at hand. And I was also told at the time that the council would not support this under any circumstances. Now, I know that officer has left now, but obviously that's the message that was given to the parish council at the time and the residents that live there. I personally don't think with the report, I think it's a great report, it's really, really well written, but it's an intentional, unauthorised development. And the only thing that I can see there is the special circumstances, the medical circumstances. But need and special circumstances are unlikely to outweigh harm to the greenbelt. We've got 3 children there, which, you know, I understand they need to live somewhere, and my sympathy's there completely. And, I'd love to rush through this local plan so that we could get that sorted. But I just don't, for me, the balance doesn't add up. And for that reason, I would like to move for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Mrs Garcia.
Thank you, Chair. I, like my fellow councillors, have some serious concerns about this. It is inappropriate development. It has been done retrospectively. It's on a very busy road. They seem to have moved from next door for some unknown reason. And really, the proposal doesn't comply with anything in the MPPF. Therefore, it is an inappropriate development, and it's an intentional, unauthorised development. So I think, I do get the special circumstances, and I myself, I've stood here and argued for special circumstances for people, but I don't know, there's got to be a point, hasn't there, where we've got to sort of come together and keep these things a little bit more, I don't know, how do you say it? Like, I suppose that's what the plan is there for, isn't it? To not allow us to encroach on countryside and erode all our green belt. So I'm a bit torn at the moment whether to vote absolutely for refusal or to go for a temporary one. But my fear with going for a temporary result is that we won't be any further forward, the family won't be any further forward, and I just don't see why it just keeps moving down the road. I suppose that's what I'm trying to say. So I hope that's my ramblings has made it clear.
Are you going to second any proposal that's been put forward?
Would you mind if I just hear the rest of the debate and then I will obviously make a decision.
Brilliant. Councillor Mrs Hassel and then Councillor Simon Ward.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to second Councillor Maldis's refusal for this on the grounds that it's not appropriate development in the green belt. There are no exceptional, very special circumstances, bearing in mind that the people moved from a residence onto that site without authorisation. And I think the unmet need for sites for gypsies does not clearly outweigh harm to the green belt.
Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, one concern I've really got on this as well is, because I know we've had this come up before in this area as well, is the demand that it's putting. I know this family already lived next door, but it's the demand that it's putting on the local schools as well, because I've heard that the local schools get quite struggling on numbers and things like that, and I just think by this family moving next door, then you've got another family moving into the property currently. Is that not just increasing that demand that's of something that's already oversubscribed? So that's another concern that I'd like to throw into the mix on this.
Thanks for those comments. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I heard members say, well, let's kick it down the can down the road a little bit and wait for the local plan. But we know the local plan, even if we got our skates on as fast as we possibly could, would not be in a state for us to vote on until 2027. If we're lucky and there's no ministerial shenanigans going on in between, we might get it by 2028, which means this site will remain unresolved until that date. In that time, there's nothing to stop the applicant from our decision tonight going to appeal. And perhaps some nice inspector from London or Birmingham, who's not had to deal with this over the years, will make a very generous decision on this application. So I will sort of words of caution to members tonight. Words of caution.
Well, can I just interject there, because you've really irritated me, because actually we shouldn't be considering anything on the grounds that it might go to appeal. We should be here making our own mind up and not taking that into consideration at all.
Have we got any further speakers? We've got Councillor Vastava.
Thank you, Chair. Very comprehensive report from the officer and explains all the needed consideration we should do for this family. We are talking about temporary accommodation. The family wants a permanent residence so they can settle down well. And I think the ILPA has got a short number of supplies for gypsy and they are not meeting the needs. And this has been heard for a long time. And I think this family needs a support now, needs to have a good life with children. There is a medical need, and there is special circumstances. I think I would like to propose approval of the proposal as proposed by the officer.
Could you do that on a live microphone?
I will second that, Chair.
Just to remind councillors that the last site of this nature that came before the committee, it was refused, and it went to appeal, and the appeal inspector dismissed the appeal with various conditions.
If you're, is it referring to the land at Foss Corner? Yeah. So I have looked into that appeal history, just for the purposes of the debate, and obviously as the chair has raised it. The inspector does give weight to the considerations that I have when establishing my very special circumstances. That includes the interest of the child. The difference in that case is that the reason the very special circumstances didn't outweigh was because there was a significant openness and visual impact. So the reason that myself and the LPA this time have fallen on the other side is because due to the nature of this, the infilling nature of this development with built form around it, we don't deem that to be, we deem it to be harmful just by the nature of it being built, but to give that significance as the dismissed appeal was, it's on different merits. So the difference in that case is that there's some harm, not significant harm, and that is to the openness. It is inappropriate development by its nature, but the very special circumstances are deemed to outweigh that.
Councillor Mrs Modis.
I can appreciate your point, but we're talking about increasing the, one side of that site is a traveller site, and the other site is where they've moved from. So I'd love to keep just that one little piece, and not fill that in with another traveller site. What we're saying is we're just increasing the one that's already there. Again, it just, to me, would look over-intensify that.
Okay, if we've got no further speakers, I think that point's been made very succinctly, and if we've got no further speakers, we'll move to the vote. Now, the first proposal that's put before us was the proposal to refuse. So if we can have a show of those who want to go for refusal, please show. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 6. And those against, please show. 6 and 6. We'll just go to the casting. I'll use my casting vote. So that is refused.
Can I just, I'm assuming they are on the grounds that were raised earlier as part of the recommendation for the moving throughs and a second refusal, particularly
if we can,
Councillor Hassel.
Yeah.
Do you want me to clarify?
Yes.
I had made a note, but it would be useful to clarify.
Intentional unauthorised development, inappropriate development in the green belt.
Fine, thank you.
As the seconder, Councillor Hassel, are you okay with those? Did you want to include anything else? You sure? Okay, right. Right, we'll move on now with Lucy. Another one of those controversial subjects, I believe.
The second application on the agenda this evening is application R23/0794. This is at 62 Lawford Road. and the site adjoining Rhine Street. This is for the proposed conversion of the existing shop and dwelling to a 13-bed house of multiple occupancy with associated bin and cycle store with rear extensions, a new wall to the front boundary and dormer windows to the rear roof slope. The application has been called in by the local councillors for consideration. The application site comprises of 2 separate units, 1 residential and 1 vacant commercial unit at ground floor with residential above. The units are located at the junction of Lawford Road and Rhine Street. It is a mainly residential area with commercial development to the east towards the town centre. As previously stated, the application seeks full planning permission for the change of use of the premises into a 13-bed house and multiple occupancy, and works would include a 2-storey rear extension to number 62 and a first floor extension over the wing at 62A, the erection of a new front boundary wall, dormer windows in the rear roof slope of number 62, and alterations to the facade. Starting first with some site photographs, we can see the existing front elevation on Lawford Road, looking to the front of the property, then looking back down Lawford Road away from the town centre, and then a side elevation in the bottom right of the images. And then we have photographs showing the rear of the application site. There is also a previous application approval from last year, application R22/0807, which could accommodate up to 10 people. It has approval that is currently existing on the site for 4 flats and 1 bedsit. Here we have the existing and proposed site plan that outlines the path that would be proposed and some garden and defensible space or planting, to the front of the site, with the cycle storage and bin storage at the rear. These were the existing ground and first floor plans, and then the floor plans that would show how the 13-bed would be accommodated under this proposal, with areas of communal and kitchen space within these areas. And then we have the existing and proposed roof plans that outline the extensions. Here we have the existing and proposed front and rear elevation that shows how the design is proposed and the changes through the extensions, and again on the existing and proposed side elevations of the property. Turning to the key considerations, the application site is located within Rugby town and in line with policy GP2 is the main focus for development in the Borough. The design of the extensions and alterations to the property are considered to complement the character of the existing and wider street scene. In terms of residential amenity, the national space standards are achieved for the development proposed for each unit. It is considered that it has been designed to respect the surrounding properties with the bin storage and cycle storage proposed at ground floor level. In terms of highways, impact on parking was an issue that was raised in objections to the proposal. A parking survey was undertaken. The Warwickshire County Council Highways Department have no objection to the application. There is the cycle parking and storage provided for the units proposed, and as it is located within the high access zone, this is considered acceptable. In terms of other key considerations, councillors will have seen in the amendment that was provided this afternoon, in terms of ecology, there have been some queries regarding a bat survey. Warwickshire County Council Ecology would have requested this to be prior to determination, but it isn't considered that the application can be held off for a decision, and with bats being of a transient nature, that it would be better for the proposed pre-commencement condition for this survey, so it would be done prior to works, subject to the granting of any permission. Environmental health have no objection, subject to the conditions that have been provided. And in terms of the NHS, by way of update as well, they have withdrawn their comments as these were requested in error. All the matters outlined here are therefore considered suitably addressed with relevant conditions outlined in either the draft decision at the time of the agenda or with the amendment provided to the local councillors. Therefore, the recommendation is the application be approved subject to the conditions and informatives as previously set out, and those included in the update earlier today. Thank you.
Councillor Harrington.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. It's really good. Thanks. Couple of questions regarding bins. Would there be a area of the road blocked off to the bin company? Well, bins can be collected, because I've had issues in my ward when they've done this. They put a big HMO or big flats in. They haven't put a consideration on the highways, and we've had a lot of recollections. So that's one of the questions I would like to ask. Secondly, when was the survey done, and also was there a traffic report as well? Because that goes into gyratory, and to be honest with you, it's a very busy piece of road, and it's one of the main arteries of Rugby around the town centre. So it'd be interesting to see when was these done. Thank you.
Yeah, but bear with us for a second. We'll get that information for you.
Yeah, in terms of the queries that you have raised, in terms of the bins, there in the rear yard is where the bin storage has been proposed, and there is going to be a private waste services team used for the collection for that. That's what's proposed for that. In terms of the parking survey, it was carried out in September of this year.
Can I just come back with clarification? I was asking, actually, there's a spot actually blocked off, double yellow lined or whatever, so people can't park there, so it gives access to the bin men to get to the bins, because you've got 13 people or 13 HMO there, you can have a lot of people there, and I've had issues, and this has been my ward. So has any been consideration from the highways department? And also, where was the report sent to us about the parking survey? Because you can see clearly within there's no room for parking.
The parking survey that was submitted with the application, let me just double check, is available online as part of the transport report with the application, and is available online with that. There isn't double yellow lines, but where the bins would be collected, there is access for vehicles. It looks to be a private entrance, so that's how it would be accessed.
If you could just put the plan up, just so we can see where.
Yeah.
I'll ask the officer to put the plan up again so we can see the route that the bins will be wheeled. Yeah, is that any good? Will that be benefit to you?
I've just got Google Maps up now. There is a drop curb there, but there's nothing there to stay stopping people parking across it. And also, because you've got no law enforcement officers in that area who's going to police it. So for me personally, that's the issue we'll have, is if anyone blocks that or goes into the entry, that's going to cause issues, I think. So we need to have a look into that, and I'm surprised Highways haven't put some sort of line there to say you can't park there.
We've got a list forming now of points of clarification. Remember, we're on. We've got Councillor Toby Lawrence next.
I have 3 questions, clarification. First one, I was a little bit confused when reading the report about the contributions. There was something about the NHS, and then I wasn't quite sure whether contributions being made or not. The second one is the parking survey. How many cars was assumed would be part this resident using? It's 13 people and it's losing a car parking space at the back rear of the property to put this in. So the numbers I would be interested to see. I will make my own judgment about whether the 20 car parking spaces available on all of the neighbouring streets can be accommodated. It's double yellow lines throughout the whole of this area. And the third one is, are these properties being seen to be suitable for home working? Are they suitable for home working? Will be my final question. So those are the three I'm asking.
Okay, yeah, in terms of the NHS contributions, a contribution was submitted to the local planning authority, but since the agenda has been published, the NHS have clarified that they had submitted those comments in error, so there's no contributions being requested under this application. In terms of home working, we wouldn't have a specific policy, and that wouldn't be a direct consideration in terms of the planning application. That would be for a potential occupant to decide as to whether they would consider that in deciding whether they would choose to occupy the property. And can I just clarify your question on the parking survey?
It was the number of car parking spaces assumed needed for this property.
Under the local plan, there would be no car parking spaces directly required, as it's an HMO application. There isn't a set number required by the local plan to be considered.
Okay, we'll move on. Councillor Sivatava.
Chair, coming back to this point about survey, there are a lot of elderly residents in the area. So were the residents in the area were involved in survey?
No, there won't have been. I don't believe.
Councillor Sanderson.
Chair. Thank you, Chair. Now, it currently has planning permission for 10 units of accommodation on the site. It could build tomorrow, yes? Yeah. Can you point out where there are 3 additional units, because this is now for 13, isn't it? Where the additional 3 units are going to be and how those have been catered for in terms of amenity?
The difference between the previous approval that's currently on the site, which allowed for 4 residential flats and 1 bedsit, had the 4 flats within the front area of the 2 properties within the bedsit on the single-storey rear element. Actually, it might be easier on the... Yes, so let me just put the pointer on. Yeah, so it would have been between this area that the 4 residential flats were being proposed across the ground and first floor, and then the bedsit is within the existing single-storey rear element, which can be seen. Yeah, so it was amendments to the existing structure, so that could potentially accommodate up to 10 people. Then because this is a different type of application of residential development, there's different considerations in terms of amenity, but in order to obtain the 13 units of accommodation through this application, there's then proposed, this is room 1, there's a lobby area, there's this kitchen and communal space on the ground floor area, some more of the ensuite bedrooms that are proposed. Sorry, let me just get to the floor plans again. Yeah, so the proposed, so yeah, as I said, this is one of the rooms, a lobby area, additional ensuite rooms, communal kitchen and living space on the ground floor. Then because there's this area of first floor extension, these are additional ensuite bedrooms, another kitchen and lounge area for the residents, And then additionally, there's 2 ensuite bedrooms proposed sort of within the roof, and that's why there is then the dormer and velux proposed in the design. Hope that clarifies.
Councillor Mrs Garcia.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered, are these conditioned to be one-person units, or could we potentially be looking at 26 or even more people in there?
I believe they're of the space standard for 1, so that would be subject to that, but I just need to double check.
Would that be conditioned that it's, because I would have an issue, I think, with it if it was potentially going to end up as couples in there, or even couples with a baby or something. I think that would be completely overdeveloped, but
yeah, it could be conditioned if that was how councillors would wish to progress with the application at a later stage.
Yeah, just to clarify, it would also be controlled through licensing as well, the number of occupants. But it would be sensible that licensing and planning would make, be consistent.
Okay, if we've got no more points of clarification that councillors want to ask, then we'll move on to the speakers. Councillor Mrs Hassel.
Thank you. And I understand that this is a application for 13 people, and I read somewhere that it said they are able to get planning permitted development for 2 6s, which would make 12, so they're only asking for 1 more. For a house of multiple occupation, 6 people, you don't need planning. So does this apply when one property, the second property, is a commercial property at the moment? Does that have the permitted development for 6 people?
Permitted development right applies to change of use of a dwelling to a small HMO.
So if they were to say that they could get 12 people on permitted development, that's not actually right.
I don't think it is, otherwise that's what would have been done. I think the application is, you have to treat the application as an application for a 13-person HMO, which requires planning permission. Whether it could be disaggregated is something that the applicant might think about separately, but I think for the purposes of your determination, you have to treat it as a 13-person HMO that's before you. I don't think you can consider the 2 6s as a legitimate fallback position because you haven't got the evidence before you to say whether that could happen or not.
No, I just think I read somewhere in the notes that they said they could get 12 without going for a full application.
They've already got planning permission.
That's for flats.
For flats,
yeah. Yep. This is change of use of what it is existing.
Yeah.
Just technicality I wanted to know.
Yeah. I mean, the information will have been assessed within the application. Obviously, what's before members now is what obviously they're looking at. The fallback position that we've got the evidence for is to show that there's permission already for 10 units on the site. So that's the fallback position. Obviously, if the gun shop converted, because obviously they are 2 separate planning units as we speak today. So if the gun shop converted to a dwelling without any restrictions, then potentially, yes, that could then become a house of multiple occupation, and then obviously the dwelling that's already there, is it number 21, could then also then become. So that's maybe where the applicant's sort of implying that you could potentially end up. But obviously I think what we're aware of the evidence before is that you've got at the moment the fallback of 10 units on site.
Has that answered the question okay? I think it has, hasn't it? If we've got no further points of clarification, we'll move on to the speakers, and the first is the applicant, Mr. Jack McLaughlin, and nice to see you here.
Hello.
And you've got 3 minutes.
Yes. Thank you for hearing me out. Okay, sorry, I've got some notes on my phone. Okay, so I run a HMO company, so I know a lot about HMOs and people within them. This property has been designed for the best use as single occupancy. it was raised that maybe 2 people could be. The application is for 13 people, 13 bedrooms, so it is just one person. And so we build them, we manage them, and so, yeah, we know a lot. Each room is almost twice the minimum requirement for licensing, so they're really, really generous rooms. So working from home and things like that, that could be something that they can accommodate if they wanted to have a desk or something like that in their rooms. Talking about HMOs and people that live within them, they are typically single people anyway, because that's it's about affordability. There's not a lot of affordable houses to rent on a single occupancy basis, and so this works really, really well. It's got 2 really, really large communal spaces that allows them to not be alone and just sort of stuck in their rooms. They can come out a bit as well. HMOs have got a bit of a bad rep, and I understand that. I know when the application first came up, it was like controversial, but I think it's how HMOs have been managed in the past, and also people know them as student accommodations and things like that. We don't have that here. We've got a few HMOs in Rugby which we have converted under permitted development, so we know a lot about the area and the people within it, and the sort of tenants that we'll have there. And they, it's not like any issues that you may well get with student HMOs or anything like that. Let's see. In terms of the parking, there's a comment about at the bins at the rear and possible highways issue on that. So there is there's a lane at the back, and you get the street like that. That's the round street, and at the back of the house there's a little lane, and so it would be. Is that my 30-second clock? Oh God. Okay. So and so they would just park down there, and the bins would be gone, and then it'd be off. In terms of parking, people that live in HMOs typically they don't drive. That is a thing, and for 10 people. On the previous application for 5 flats, there would be a more cars than the 13 bedrooms as a HMO, just because they work, they walk to work, etc., and use public transport. Okay.
Thanks for that. Can I get you just to cancel your microphone? Is that okay? Now I'm going to ask the officer whether the speaker has raised anything that you want to respond to, or you're okay with that? Okay. In that case, then we'll move on to the ward councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. If you look at that drawing, look at the garden, and I've just heard the previous speaker talk about the parking in the alleyway. Councillor Harrington rightly put about getting the refuse truck at the back. That's what it's set out for, not for parking. And when you look at that drawing, and I'll come to a couple of it, you look at that shed between the 2 property, putting 13 bicycle rack. The door at the back is raised off the ground, so you've got to have a steps, right? And when you put 2 Euro bins, there's hardly any room for amenity. It's got fire hazard. You cannot escape. You take the size of a bicycle and how long they are. There is no room to escape. When you look at the Euro bins, and we had a lot of issues with the Euro bins where they are shared. And when you take all the Amazon boxes, it will be filled in one day, I'm telling you, because at the moment, the 3 or 4 that we got, which are owned by council, there isn't sufficient Euro bins to cover 13-bedroom house property, if you want to call that. When you look around the property where it's located, everywhere we had put double yellow lines on Lawford Road, Round Street where it is, you take Pennington Mews, you take Vicarage Road. When you look around, everything got double yellow lines simply for the principle for deterring the town centre employee, and this was done by Councillor Watson, Mrs. Watson. You remember her? Very well. And opposite this entrance to that is your good friend, remember Mr. Nightingale, who owns the business? He's been there a long time. And if somebody parks, it's have a detriment to his business. If somebody parks there, you're going to get, no way you're going to get the truck going inside the back way. If you think that these people who live in there are working from home, that brings itself another additional car parking. It will have an impact directly on the local businesses. There is a petrol station which was allocated, same basis again, that there's a parking space for the post office to be moved from Bridget Street to the petrol station at the top of, where I'm talking next to Mr. Nightingale. You go 2 or 3 takeaways, double yellow line. So, Mr. Chairman, there is no parking adequate. And when you look around, there is 100 residential homes which people are living there who are vulnerable. There are parking bay at the back of this place that will be, especially for those people, which is owned by the Rugby Borough Council, and it has just allocated for that. So they will be abused, and they'll be having a time to do that, Chairman.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chairman. I hope I've said enough. Okay. And I hope you exercise your right to put your hands up today and refuse.
You've completed your presentation, and I'm going to ask you to leave the chamber.
Leave, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Both the speakers have raised various issues and commented, and we have the opportunity for the officer to respond to any of those comments. Unfortunately, as councillors sitting on the committee, we don't have that right to directly question the speakers. No, that used to be the case, but that isn't the case now.
No, well, my understanding from discussing with legal previously is that the way it's set out in our constitution is that the members of the public obviously have the right to speak as speakers, but then any questions and points of clarification should be to the officer. There seemed to be in past practice a habit that councillors then started questioning the speakers, and that shouldn't have been allowed to happen. So it was pointed out to us that what we shouldn't be allowing that to happen, and any points of clarification should be directed back to the officer.
Okay, in that case then we'll move straight into the debate.
Just on that as a point of clarification. Apologies, Chair. So we have any questions now? After that, we could ask them of the officer.
Yeah, correct.
Correct. Okay, thank you for that comment.
Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chair. Something I'd like to ask the officer straight away, because I've heard this quite a few times about houses of multiple occupancy, and the speaker did make the point that generally residents don't drive. Have we got any evidence of that kind of thing, if you see what I mean? Because I have heard this from a few people saying this, and then you hear residents complaining that parking is tight and things like that. So it would just be good if we've got some kind of evidence that...
I mean, through you, Chair, I mean, part of the evidence base to the local plan and the study that we did before did look partly at that, but we haven't got sort of hard evidence that says of all of our HMOs, then, like 30% or so, only drive or whatever. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it did start to look at that, and I think there is some credibility to what was being said there, but obviously what I can't say is hand on heart that we have the evidence that actually specifically states this is the percentage figures or whatever. But I think there is evidence that some obviously are moving into an urban area where parking is not being provided, so it is obviously a no parking scheme. Our parking standards are assess HMOs on their own merits, so obviously any parking that is available is on street on a first come first served basis, but it is possible again because also of the nature of the occupants at that sort of lower end of the market that they may be looking to locate in an urban area where there are alternative modes of transport and not just the private car. But yeah, we don't specifically have those figures to hand, unfortunately.
Councillor Caradar.
Thank you, Chair. The question about people living in HMOs mostly use the public transportation. The study was conducted mostly in London. It doesn't reflect the urban areas like Rugby. There are 2 points. People living in the center of the Rugby, going to warehouses, working there and coming back, they tend to use the cars because most of them do the night duties, so they use the cars. And also people who are commuting from Rugby to London to do the job, most of them do work from home probably 2 or 3 days in the week, and rest of the time they commute through train. But the people living here, when they do the work from home days, they tend to use cars for the little things like running to shops or things like that. So other than London, outside towns doesn't come under the same criteria. So we have to think about it carefully, that the residents, HMO residents, do use cars, and we have to take it into account when we come to a decision. Thank you.
So we've got Councillor Mrs Maudis, and lots of hands going up after that.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so reading this one, we've had HMOs quite recently, quite a few of them, and we always find that our hands are tied because of a lack of policy. This one struck me, I don't know about anybody else, this one struck me as just too much. It's an intensification of use. It's the traffic generation from the site, from the development, adequacy of parking, it's a loss of family dwelling, detrimental impact on neighbouring amenity. They're just some of the things that I've written down that just struck me with this application, that it was just too much of a development for the area. I've driven through the area, and similar to I know we can't compare, but the last one that we've debated with that concentration in that one ward, we have that here as well. You know, there doesn't seem to be a fair spread. There just seems to be a concentration of HMOs, and the impact of that on the area. So I'm going to go against officer recommendation and cite for refusal, please.
Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, that is the main consideration here. Not HMOs per se, because that will be a policy decision during the local plan. I expect to hear that earworm going on from now until that has been decided, but that's the position that we are in. The only decision to make here is this particular site an over-intensification of development? And what evidence do we have to support that?
Councillor Srivastava.
I think we all have driven through Lawford Road. This is a very busy road, and parking is a great issue. The report recognizes that a shortfall on site, and the survey says there will be probably they will accommodate on the side roads, put a pressure on the residents. And I think there has not been a proper consultation with the residents. There are a lot of old people involved, as I understand. I think there is a lack of information. To me, I don't think there is a proper development.
Councillor Harrington.
Can I second the proposal of refusal, please?
Okay, Councillor Harrington.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not, obviously, I represent a ward that has a lot of HMOs in Ben Ward, and I do have a lot of bad things and good things to say about them. But the issue I've got is, and it always comes back to the fact, is I know we're trying to get away from a car society, we're trying to be using bikes and things like that, but the experience I've had is people don't put bike sheds in, as they promise. Also, as well, I've had issues with bin collections, leaving the bins out on the street and things like that, which is the major issue I do have with them in my ward. I'm just going to be completely honest with you from there. Also, I've got a very big concern regarding the residency behind there with the council houses, because you've got people there. I mean, if you can't find a space at a certain time of night, what are you going to do? You're going to park in that space and taking spaces off that. Who's going to monitor it and things like that? Also, the extra traffic you got down the road, which is one of the big arteries on Norfolk Road, is one of the biggest arteries there. I'm very concerned about highway safety as well, because I think at the moment, if you go down there, it's chock-a-block anyway. And if you're going to put, okay, there's possibly not up to 13 cars, but if you can have that, and you can have partners and friends and coming over and things like that, it's not just the people parking there, it's the people coming to visit as well and things like that. So I think we need to really, really look into this. But I can't second it now, it's all been done. I would go for refusal, but I would actually say highway safety, because the amount of extra traffic it's going to cost, and also what's going to happen with bin collections, because at the moment you haven't got a T-bar across, or H-bar across that entry there. And what happens if someone parks in front of it and the guys can't get to it? I'm very concerned about that. So for me, it'll be a refusal.
Okay, Councillor Mrs Garcia.
I'm sorry about this, but given that they've already got planning permission for flats, and I believe, could you just remind me how many flats there were? Was it 10? I thought it was.
4 flats and 1 bed sit was
Right.
the approval that was provided under the previous application.
4
flats and 1 bed sit.
4 flats and 1 bed sit. So really the amount of people, if this is conditioned to 13, wouldn't be hardly negligible in...
There would be an increase, but it would be up to the committee to decide as to what weight
they
they
were allowed in the flats? Were they 1-bedroom flats?
I would have to double check that they may have been 1 bedroom, but there could have been occupied by 2 people. Yeah.
So the amount of people that this would increase by is negligible. It's actually quite a nice, as far as HMOs go. And I think the trouble is, when we look at HMOs, we don't realise always what a beneficial asset it is to Rugby to have housing that's cheaper. I think the trouble is in Rugby, we've had such a history of shoddy landlords, basically, that have inappropriately developed or not developed, more to the point, and pushed a lot of people into small terraced houses. So, I mean, I know now that it has to be licensed, but it wasn't originally. So I just feel that we're perhaps having a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction. I get the bit about the cars, but there is actually Asda car park, isn't there, across the road? You know, and I know that it does impact that amount of people on the amenities and the people nearby. But I just think that because they've already got planning permission for something, it shouldn't really just be dismissed out of hand, because it really, this lower end of the market is so needed in Rugby. And if it's properly managed, and actually if it was conditioned that it was only allowed to be single occupancy, I think I would support it.
Would you be proposing acceptance for that then?
I can do. Yeah.
Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to follow up on what Councillor Garcia has just said as well, because I know there is a big need for HMOs. I know it is a hot topic, I do know that, but at the same time I know from a from a local housing allowance for single, I think it's males in particular, 35 and under. I know the housing allowance that they get is very minimal, essentially that you can afford to live in a HMO. So there is a big demand. I know it can put on infrastructure, which I know parking can be an issue. It's almost a shame that we can't ask the Speaker any questions now, because I'd love to chat to the Speaker to find out, I know that how the HMOs are managed and things like that with the other properties that they do. I know we can't ask that question. But as Councillor Garcia said, the big issue is how HMOs are managed. That's been one of the big problems.
Could I just add to what my little piece? These things are licensed now. They weren't historically. They are licensed now. So if the licensing team and the enforcement team are doing their jobs properly, there shouldn't be an issue with an HMO anymore.
And sorry, can I just finish as well? So, yeah, I agree. Yeah, about the licensing. The other thing I think we keep dismissing about Warwickshire County Council's traffic reports. They are the experts on this, and I assume that a lot of work has gone into this to assess, you know, why they're happy for approval. Yeah. So I will second your approval. Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Lawrence.
I think the need for an HMO is not, again, I think it's not the question we're talking about here. It is just about the fact that this seems to be too many people in too small a space. There is double yellow line on two sides of this property. There is 12 car parking spaces in total on Round Street and 8 on Pennington Street, as I've counted them. Everything else is private parking, and it's double yellow line. And then every street that this runs onto is double yellow line again. Now, as I've understood it, that we're not considered number of parking spaces this is needed. It's not even in consideration by highways. Okay? And the officer will come back to me, I'm sure, on that. Therefore, they haven't considered amenity of parking spaces. It is up to us, therefore, to consider that. There is a local plan that we'll go through. The local plan will presumably have these restrictions in when we can get it through. In the meantime, we have to make our judgments. This is an intensification of this area. And I think there is enough on the original plan providing accommodation to people who need it. Many people do actually have partners and do want two-bedroom flats as well. It's not, there is a need for those in Rugby as well. It's not just about HMOs. So I think I'm inclined to go for refusal, but alter our own opinion.
Okay, have we got any further speakers? Councillor Harrington.
I looked through the application as well. There's nothing about highway, it's about parking, but there's nothing about highway safety. Can I just, is there anything there? Because is any, so regarding traffic and things like that, because parking, there's got the actual report on there, but there's nothing for highway safety. And we just got a letter through just going to approve it, but what mechanisms they've gone in the background to find out what is that safe to have that amount of people possibly there?
Firstly, in response to Councillor Harrington, in terms of the safety aspect, the application has been fully assessed by our statutory consultee, Warwickshire County Council Highways Department, and they have provided a response of no objection. In terms of the parking, Warwickshire County Council, again, Councillor Lawrence, would have considered what we have in terms of the local plan, which would have provided the basis for the officers to have the consideration as to whether we consider it acceptable that there isn't specified allocated parking for this unit, and based on its location within the Rugby town and being the most sustainable location in terms of the local plan, that is why it is considered that with the access to the town centre and options of public transport, that it is considered on this occasion. That's why it has been recommended for approval with that.
Can I just come back to that? We have this idea, it's in the town centre. It's 1.2 miles away from the train station. Okay, it's 0.4 of a mile away from Asda car park. It is not near a lot of these public transports. So we're getting this idea that because it's in a town centre, it's actually close to places. It's not. It's not close to where people are working. They have to actually use transport to go there. Too far away from the train station. And we really believe our bus services are going to get people over to these places where they're going to need to work. These places are far away. There are the warehouses on the outskirts of Rugby. They're not, they have to have cars.
Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I think we're best careful of not drifting on this one and trying to add policy that's not there. We can only work with the policies we actually have. The only one that's applicable to this one is, do we or do we not believe it is an over-intensification of the development of this site? And I can't see that that's the problem, but because the original 4 flats would have allowed for double occupation, which means there would have been 8 people in those flats. No, sorry, more than that, wouldn't it? Because there's 4 flats, 16 people in those flats, up to 16 people in those flats. Now, it was sensible. There was a sensible proposal that we limit the occupations to single occupation. I think that would be an amendment that we could take on board in terms of the proposals that Councillor Garcia put forward. So if she will accept that as a friendly amendment to her proposal, then I think we could work with her. But in terms of other highway, I think we cannot invent policy we haven't got, and we're just going to have to grin and bear it until we've got policy in line.
Have we got any further speakers? I'm going to get our legal advisor to sum up the debate so far to try and give us some sort of clarification on which way we vote.
Well, yeah, just to clarify, Chair, I'm not going to try and influence the way that members vote, but just some guidance before a potential vote on a proposal to refuse, just in terms of reasons. I know a lot's been talked about over-intensification of the site, but that, of course, is not a reason to refuse an application of and in itself. What members need to think about is what harm arises from that over-intensification. So what planning harm arises, and you'll need to identify that in any refusal, and that will need to be done in this case in the context of an existing planning permission for residential development in the form of the flats. Just in terms of the parking and highway safety, members will be aware that they're not bound by the position of county highways, but if they are minded to depart from their view and they've said that they've fully assessed it, then you need to clearly set out what it is about their representation that you disagree with and what particular concerns you have about their view. And the third point I've made briefly, just in relation to management, Richard's referred to it already, but there is separate housing legislation that deals with the management of HMOs, and also in relation to fire safety, and the managers of HMOs are subject to a fit and proper person test to ensure that they're the right people or that they've been vetted and are deemed to be the right people to be managing the HMOs. So just a few pointers there, and the overriding message is to be clear about your reasons, particularly where departing from your officers in relation to issues such as highways and policy compliance on refuse, etc.
Okay, in that case then if there's no...
Sorry, can I just come back on one point? And I totally understand what Councillor Lawrence was saying about the distances to like the railway station and all that, but I just wanted to make some members are fully aware of the comments from the Highway Authority. They have stated in their consultation response that they've undertaken a full assessment of the planning application. And they've also said that in their view, they consider that the site is located in a sustainable area with access to public transport and within walking distance of town centre amenities, which they are of the opinion will encourage low levels of car ownership and use. Now, obviously, what we as officers, we have to, it's the Highway Authority who are the experts in this, and as obviously commenting from our legal advisor, we have to be very careful when we move or deviate from that highway advice. And as been mentioned before, that can expose the council to risk, if the appellant actually wish to actually appeal that. But obviously, yes, members, it is within their gift, to obviously, have a different opinion to the recommendation of the Highway Authority and officers, and we do accept that. But I just obviously have to, wanted to make that point clear. Thank you.
Okay. Before we move to the vote, I'm going to ask, well, the first proposal was for refusal, and the proposer was Councillor Mrs Moudis. Could you provide us with the reasons for your proposal for refusal?
Yeah. Traffic generation from the development, adequacy of parking, loss of family dwelling, house and employment use, detrimental impact on neighbouring amenity and the intensification of use.
Okay, in that case then we will move to the vote, and that first proposal was a proposal for refusal. All those in favour of refusal, please show. And all those against, please show. So let me just count that. So that was, for those watching online, it was 5 for refusal and 7 against refusal. Right, the second proposal was for approval. All those in favour of approval, please show.
Chair, is with that with the extra...
That is with that recommendation and the condition. That is 7 for. And those against? And that's 5 against. Thank you very much. Yeah, it is approved, yes. Right, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the advance notices of site visits.
I've not received any further ones, thank you, Chair.
Okay, just I tend to find that site visits can be very, very informative, and my advice to any councillor is, if you can, to possibly come along to those site visits and ask all the relevant questions, and you can see the layout of the land a bit better, even with my glasses. Right, in that case we'll move on to item 6, which is planning appeals update.
Thank you, Chair. Appendix A of the appeals report identifies appeals that we've had decisions on. Some of those I have reported to previously, because obviously they came in right at the end of the last quarter. So I've got nothing further to add to those. In terms of Appendix B, the only appeal we've actually had since this was republished and came back is one at Willoughby House, Moor Lane, Willoughby. Interestingly, the inspector looked at the fallback position on this one because the appeal was for 3 dwellings. Whilst the inspector said it wasn't an unsustainable location, there was a fallback position under Class Q of agricultural conversion of up to 5 potential units, which would accept the principle of 5 units on the site. So on that basis, the inspector actually allowed the appeal. The other things I wanted to point out towards the end of Appendix B was that there's reference to a single appeal at Plot 14, Top Part, Top Road. At the time this report was published, the inspectorate had only processed one of the appeals. We now know that the other plots, 14 to 19, conclusively have all appealed to the inspectorate. That appeal is now up and running, and there's due to be a hearing towards the end of January next year to work out the outcome of that. Obviously, we as the council will be defending the council's reason for refusal on those plots. Also, just a bit of an update, Coventry Stadium appeal, members may recall that was undertaken over just under a 2-week period, the first sitting back in, I think it was September. That was adjourned, and it'll reconvene at 9:30 on Monday the 27th of November and also on Tuesday the 28th of November. There are regular updates online of documents that are being submitted to that, and the public can also attend that and watch it live stream. So that appeal is still ongoing, and there will be obviously closing statements on that Tuesday as well. So thank you, Chair.
Very much for that, and especially the update on Brandon Stadium. Councillor Sanderson.
Chair, yeah, it's 301 Clifton Road, as you know, has gone to appeal. again, I think there's still a great deal of concern regarding the parking on that junction by the crossing. That's been further compounded by a consultation that's just been launched by Warwickshire County Council to provide more on-street parking in that area. If it wasn't bad enough now, the County Council are now asking for a consultation on additional parking. As local ward councillors, we have objected because of the unsafe nature of the crossing, which was the original reason why we refused the takeaway on that corner. I'm quite happy to give our officers a copy of that consultation if it would assist them.
Obviously, when that application goes to appeal, they then are governed by the timetable of the planning inspectorate. There is a strict timetable for when people can make comment on the appeals, and also when the local planning authority can make final comments. If you bear with us, we can try and find out what those dates were. I suspect they've already passed, so we may be in a position where we can't make. Yeah. They have. Okay. Yeah. Final comments. It would be back at the beginning of September, so we're not in a position now to make any further comments on that to the planning inspector.
And the inspector can't receive any new evidence.
And from what I understand, they are generally very strict on their time frame, and when they mean final comments, they mean it. The only time I know when they've allowed extra comments is when there's been a change in national legislation. So, for example, if they introduced a new MPPF, they normally then write to the appellants and the local planning authority and say, do you wish to make any change? Because obviously they normally come in with instant effect. Obviously what you're talking about is a consultation, so I guess it's not, that in itself obviously isn't a final conclusion. It's not a change of policy or anything. So as far as I'm aware, the inspectorate would not accept any more comments unless it was national change in policy.
Thank you.
Any further questions on the planning appeals update? In that case, then we'll move on to item 7 on the agenda, which is, believe it or not, delegated powers, delegated decisions even. Noted? Will that be noted? Yeah, okay. Yeah. I thought there was something going wrong here. Councillor Sanders hasn't... could I also thank John Gregory for coming along, and our legal advisor tonight. Thank you very much, John, for coming along, giving us your words of wisdom. Much appreciated. And that draws the meeting to a close. Can we switch off the live stream? Thank you, one and all.